Hey, welcome. You're watching BringYourWorth.tv. My name is Damon Brown. I'm an entrepreneurial coach to side hustlers, solopreneurs, otherwise non-traditional entrepreneurs just like yourself. And you're watching Bring Your Worth TV. I come to you most if every Wednesday, usually live at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. Thank y'all for coming through. We're approaching 400 episodes, going on 4 years this coming December. It's been an amazing run. I appreciate each and every one of y'all that have subscribed, even those that have come through and checked out the show. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe for free right below, or just go to bringyourworth.tv and subscribe there. Sorry, I just had some tea. I got a piece of a tea bag in my mouth. and you can get the complete Bring Your Worth collection. It's out now. Thanks so much for supporting it. It's 3 of my business books. In total, ends up being about 6 or 7 books in this volume. Really did it for y'all. It was it's the Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. Remember the name of my first business book. What's the name of it? The Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, the best-selling trilogy. Again, thanks to y'all for supporting it. Bring Your Worth, of course, the eponymous thing that everything's named after with the show. And lastly, my personal favorite, Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. All of them will help you get to where you need to go. And they're all in one volume. If you want to go ahead and support the channel and you want to get into the audiobook version of it, I actually am making it exclusively available for Bring Your Worth TV listeners. So if you click on the link below, you can actually listen to, I think it's like an 8-hour or so audiobook. It's done with my little hands. And just as a gesture of appreciation and support and love to y'all for supporting me over the years, particularly with all the different books, and some of them become bestsellers, some of them being cited a lot, some of them being shared among y'all, and some of them really supporting my coaching practice. So again, I appreciate it. You can listen to it right after this program. Just roll into it. The link is right below. And of course, you can get the audiobook, the Kindle version, and the physical version from me, or at your favorite bookstore. All the links are below for that. In case you missed it, a couple weeks ago, we had a really lively live. So that's how funny that sounded. In case you missed it, it's 5 Secrets to Mastering Change and Transition. It's actually one of the longer lives that I've ever done. I think it lasted about an hour and a half. There was so much stuff to get into, talking about the difference between change and transition, how we can work with it, the different phases of those two parts. Change is the outer circumstances. Transitions are the emotions or the things that we deal with on the inside. So if we're working through those different things, giving you hopefully the framework to go ahead and allow you to do that. Today's show is my favorite banned books. We're doing this for 2 reasons. Makes it 4. 2 reasons. The first reason is actually my birthday today. So September 25th is my birthday. Thank you so much for y'all that have already given me a shout out or given me some love privately or publicly. I appreciate y'all. I'm starting to see the gray hair starting to come in. So it's like, okay, it's getting real, y'all. It's getting real. But, I'd rather have gray hairs than no hair. So, I appreciate the love and support, as I do this solar return, as the astrologists or the astronomers say, as well as the astrologers as well. Secondly, we're doing it because I can't think of a better birthday present for this week is Banned Books Week. I'm an author of 27 books. About half of them are co-authored. Most of them are independently published at this point. Handful of them are bestsellers, again, thanks to y'all. And so I know the traditional publishing industry, and I also know my own independent publishing industry, which with Bring Your Worth Publishing, all the books, that are featured in this. And the subject of banned books is one of those soapbox topics for me. And if you don't know what a soapbox topic is, it's something where in the old school days, let's say a century and a half ago, if someone had something to say, particularly in a major city, I'm thinking like New York, shout out to Chicago. We're going to talk about Chicago in a minute, but in a major city like that, maybe not LA, because it was more of a driving community, then they would grab a soapbox, which is a little crate that soap would come in when it was delivered. So basically like a big crate. We would call them milk crates, right? Because I know that from the little bit I dabbled in DJing and from my good friends that are DJing. It'll be a milk crate, and you take the milk crate out, you put it on the corner of 4th and Broadway, or wherever you want to be, and then you stand on there and talk your stuff. No microphone, just that's why they call it people. That's why they say people getting on their soapbox. Soapbox really, this is really a soapbox issue for me, just because the dissemination, if I get the word out of my mouth, dissemination of knowledge and understanding, the ability to communicate, the technology, whether it was Gutenberg, 6 or so centuries ago with the printing press, or we're talking about the internet today and the Freedom of Information Act. I spent a long time as a journalist, and I have 2 degrees in journalism, studied under some of the best of them. Rest in peace to Jane Briggs Bunning and other ones that I've studied under. So with FOIA and being able to get information from the government and from companies and all that stuff, it's always this back and forth. He or she or they who control the information has the power. And so when we're talking about books being banned, and this is happening in real time, it's happening down in Florida. I believe it's happening in Arkansas right now. It's happening even in quote unquote more progressive parts of the United States. When we're actually banning books, we're actually saying we're not going to allow the public to get access to this book unless it has. Now I'm sorry to sound like a lawyer, unless it has a really extreme public harm, where you could actually harm other people with it to that extreme, then what are we talking about? And so many of the books that are being pushed to be banned or are very controversial at this point, and we'll see a blend of both of them with the list I have that I'm going to announce in a second. So many of them are based on opinion, people not being comfortable with someone's sexuality, not being comfortable with someone's opinion about something. And that's just such a fine line, as I have John Coltrane as well as James Baldwin behind me, who dealt with their own way of expressing things that wasn't always accepted at the time. But imagine if their works were not available to people like me who were born after or, a few years before they passed away. We wouldn't have access to that. So it's such an important week. If you want to learn more about the Banned Books Week, you can go to bannedbooksweek.org. That's the official site as far as I know. Be sure and check them out. Support that. I also have a list of my favorite banned books. One is at bookshop.org, my favorite place to support the independent bookstores. But you don't have to go to your local place to do the independent bookstores, though I highly encourage it. You can also go ahead and go through bookshop.org, and they have a whole network in the United States and I believe in the rest of North America, but you can check it out. Hopefully my overseas people can get some of that too. And they will connect you with the independent publishers that will go and get it going for you. If you want more traditional, or if you're already an Amazon user or whatever, then I also do the same list over on Amazon. So if you want to check out any of these, just go to my list and all those things. So today we're going to talk about my favorite banned books. I believe there's 4 of them we're going to talk about today, as well as a bonus one. I'm excited about it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll get your next favorite read. Speaking of that, today's show is brought to you by Shortform. Shout out to Shortform. They are the best companion, or the ultimate companion, for a book lover. And there's a few different ways that you can work with Shortform. The first way is to actually have a good summary of books that are massive or that you haven't read in years and you need them for a particular project or idea. For instance, I did a show recently featuring the 48 Laws of Power with Robert Greene. It's a massive book. It's a fantastic book. Shout out to Robert. I hope you're doing well. And there was one particular law that I was trying to remember. And I do not have the physical book with me. I have the audio book. I was like, I had the show, which was one of these shows. I had the show later on in the day. I'm like, I can't run to the library and I can't buy it on Kindle and go through all, I'm not going to go through all that. But Shortform was able to come through, and it's like, oh, that was rule number 3, appear a certain way in front of others, appear another way in front of other people. I won't get into the rule, but that basic idea. Number 1, it's good for that kind of research type of thing. Number 2, it actually connects you to other resources that are related to the books that you're interested in. So I'm going to go ahead, and it's always a crapshoot with technology. Let's see if it's working. Long-term listeners know, oh, you know the deal. Yeah, there we go. All right, this is Shortform. This is my account. You see the 48 Laws of Power, Big Magic, and Think Again. The last 2, I actually saw them speak at 10, and I'm super, super cool with what Adam Grant. Hope you're doing well. So I I've been blessed enough to be connected to these three fantastic books all across the world, all across the list. So one of the books I'm going to talk about today, which is a bonus book, is Fast Food Nation. So hopefully my technology, there it is. So we'll put fast food. We'll just do fast food for now. There it is. Here's Fast Food Nation. And then I actually have a physical book here, so I'm not going to start reading this. But actually, we'll go ahead and break down about the book. You can start reading it, and it'll highlight certain big ideas. It's a pretty thick and dense book, but by far one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. So I'll summarize these things, but I won't summarize it to the point of I'm old enough. Speaking of birthdays, I'm old enough to remember Cliff Notes. And so it's like, it's much deeper than Cliff Notes. I was never a fan of Cliff Notes. No offense to Cliff, but this is way deeper than that. What I also like about it too, and let's see if I can get it going here. Here we go. If you go ahead and do this, so you look up fast food, in this case, Fast Food Nation, but then it also connects to podcasts. It also connects to the Wall Street Journal. So for a journalist like myself, it's like a gold mine where it's like, yeah, I want to learn more about this book, or I've had Fast Food Nation on my shelf for going on 2 decades, whenever it first came out. Like, I don't necessarily need that part of it, but I could use other resources that I don't have access to, particularly, again, in the world of podcasting. And they'll have articles from the Wall Street Journal, articles from HBR, so Harvard Business Review. I can't remember what the letters were. Harvard Business Review, and all over the place, even some of the more indie publications. The deal that I have with short form for Bring Your Worth listeners like you is that you can actually sign up for free, get a free trial, and also get 20% off the annual subscription, which is a great discount. It's fantastic. I'm glad I was able to work it out with them. Be sure and take advantage of it. I don't know how long the deal is going to go or if the deal is going to change, but that's what we're working with right now. So if you're watching this live, take advantage of it. Check it out. Do a test drive with it. I'm going to go and close it. Here we go. Working. It's working out. Awesome. I'm always glad when the technology works out. But shout out to Short Form for taking care of the broadcast today. All right. So, excuse me. Seasons are changing. Again, one of the hazards of having an Equinox birthday. It's like I always have a little bit of congestion. All right, today's show, my favorite banned books. Again, banned books are tough because what determines why a book should be banned? Or more importantly, who determines how a book should be banned? And I know growing up, whether it was books from Maya Angelou, later on, a little bit past my generation, but books from Toni Morrison, where I grew up with Toni Morrison books, but people trying to ban them really didn't happen until I was later on in my schooling. Amazing works. Even going back to 1984 with George Orwell, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, I always screw up his name, but hopefully I got his name right. These are books and authors who have been banned. In other words, if you went to the library, or in more extreme cases, if you're with a copy of the book, you can get fined or even arrested, or back in the day, even worse. And we're just talking about America at this point. Internationally, I did some research for this episode. It's wild. It's like, yeah. And so we're dealing with a lot of bans that are happening state by state at this point, where folks that are more conservative, sometimes politically, but I mean more as far as mindset, are saying, well, we don't want this book around because it features an LGBTQ plus character. So not even the main character, a side character. So we don't want our kids to see that. We don't want that, even though, the internet actually exists, you know what I mean? And kids and people talk. So whatever the reason for the bans, a lot of the time they're based, I would argue, on a particular prejudice or particular fear, or actually more often a particular ignorance. So the banned books I'm talking about today, some of them might not be available where you're at, which is kind of scary to say, but it's real talk. So the books that I'm talking about, they're some of my favorite banned books. Some of them were on the borderline of being banned or were extremely controversial. Some of them you might have a hard time getting. And so let me stop beating around the bush and let's get into it. Again, the lists are available at bookshop.org if you want to support your local or nearby indie bookstores, and available on Amazon if you go more traditional. The first book is actually one of mine. It's called Porn and Pong: How Grand Theft Auto, Tomb Raider, and Other Sexy Games Changed Our Culture. This is my big head on the back. Again, speaking of birthdays, when I was much younger and I had a lot more hair, but I insisted on wearing the hats. Shout out to my photographer and one of the people that helped make the book happen. And rest in peace to Adam Parfrey, who was the publisher of this book in 2008. This book represents a few different things. The first thing is that it represents the 5 years I spent working on it. And I was still in my 20s when I started working on this book. Ended up coming out in 2008. So when it came out, I was in my very early 30s. And I have distinct memories of the launch party in San Francisco. If you were there, you were there. The stuff I can't talk about, but it was an amazing time. And just having a wonderful experience getting it out and it being my first major book. The second part of it, it was my first time of actually talking about technology and pop culture in a way that was embellic, I think that's the word, embellic, representative of the direction I was going to go later on with Cuddler, which was a startup that I co-founded a handful of years later that me and my two co-founders ended up selling. It connected people for hugs. A lot of the research that I was doing in AI, which I've talked about over the last year or two, you can look it up again on the channel at bringyourworth.tv. When I was talking about that, and I added AI to some of my books with the visuals. Again, they're all available for free on the channel. All the work of that began kind of with this back when this came out in 2008. And if you do the math, I started working on it in 2003. So I started working on it 21 years ago, and it came out again about 16 years ago. The basic premise of the book is this. There is a connection, I called it a historical shorthand, between technology, particularly if we look at video games, and sexuality, particularly in regards to how we connect to each other, intimacy. And the beginning of the modern pornography industry and the beginning of the modern video game industry happened in the same summer of 1973 with Deep Throat, which came out on the Deuce or 42nd back in New York, I want to say in May of 1973. And then on the other coast, closer to where I live in Las Vegas, over in Sunnyvale, California, Northern California, it's just outside the Bay Area, I believe, or just south of the Bay. I think that'd be South Bay, but over in Sunnyvale, and that was the beginning of Pong, which was the first major video game with the two bars and the dot going in between them, where you hit it back and forth like tennis. What I argued is that if we use those, we can actually use them as historical shorthand. And that video games, and to a lesser extent, pornography and technology, could be measured and should be measured in the same way that we use movies, we use books. You think of Shakespeare, Dickens, and so forth. We think of music, obviously. Again, back to my guy, Coltrane. We use those as historical shorthand. We use those as markers all the time. What I was trying to do is go and say, okay, video games at this time when it came out were 35 years old, if we go based on Pong. And so we can use this over this period of time to do this historical shorthand and represent the milestones of how we're creating, how we connect with each other. And of course, tying it to sexuality and pornography and intimacy, how we actually communicate with each other as a society. That was the attempt. And no one had done that previously. And that's one of the reasons why it took 5 years to write this thing. So when it came out, you can tell the cover. Shout out to Coop. Coop was actually the original artist of this cover. And he did an original drawing that I believe was this. And he has this huge version of it in his loft, and I believe in Los Angeles. I never visited the loft, but my publisher did. He was able to get the cover for us. So again, I'm in debt to both Coop as well as to Adam Parfrey, the late Adam Parfrey of Pharaoh House. Two things ended up happening. The first thing is that it got a lot of acclaim from Publishers Weekly and other folks are saying, oh, this is the first time that video games are being taken seriously as art, despite the farcical cover. At the same time, it was also banned in different countries. I learned this because people were telling me this. Shout out to Sri Lanka. They're the first one I knew to ban this book. And I'm like, oh, my little book is banned. Okay. So it ended up being this wonderful, wonderful journey with the book. And I'm working with the Museum of Sex. Shout out to Sarah, who's a veteran over there, and other folks who are there now over in New York. And all these different things I was able to do from this book, even despite it being banned in a few different countries. The second part, which actually relates to 2024, is that earlier this year, if you're connected with me on the little bit of social media that I'm on, you might have saw an announcement where I said, hey, I'm actually working with Pharaoh House, and I'm actually going to be doing the long-awaited audiobook myself through Bring Your Worth Publishing. It'll be out soon. The first few chapters are available at bringyourworth.tv. Now, if you've been watching bringyourworth.tv, you notice I have not mentioned it on the live. I've only mentioned it once or twice to people that I know, of course, as well as to like one or two places on social media. A lot of support of it, which I love. A lot of people are waiting for it, which makes me even feel better. 15, 16 years later, I'm like, yes, it's still relevant, particularly now. We're talking about AI and connecting with robots and stuff like that, kind of that revolution that's been happening. I had the audiobook come out. It's already been recorded. It's being edited as we speak. But the first few chapters are done. Had them live. And then I got a message 2 days later from YouTube saying that the first chapter was too explicit and I was at risk of losing my channel. I got a warning. They're like, you can't do that again on me. And so if you actually go on there, then some of it's available, not all of it. And so that ended up putting me back on the drawing board. So the version that you're actually going to be getting at bringyourworth.tv will be semi-censored, not too much censored, but semi-censored. This version is not the version that you're going to get likely later in this year in audiobook form will not be censored. Let's be clear. Speaking of censorship. So essentially, this book has been banned twice. Twice. within two different decades. Right, I think I'm up there with Henry Miller with Tropic of Cancer or something. Like, let's go. So I couldn't be more proud of the book. My thing is that if people don't want you to read a book, sorry, I got all kinds of stuff in my mouth. Back to the tea again at the top of the show. If people don't want you to read a book, the important thing is to ask why. And frankly, I think we're so afraid of intimacy, and it's a guttural, intense thing for us. And so it takes a while for us to be comfortable having that conversation. I'm happy to be the conduit with it. I'll take the arrows. The book is still being cited now. And along with Brenda Brathwaite, shout out to you, Brenda. Hope you're doing well over in Ireland. And maybe one other author. We're one of the few authors that have actually tackled video games and have been regularly cited as far as its discussion with intimacy and how we communicate. Proud to be one of those few, and really good stuff. If you want to go ahead and listen to the first chapter of the book that did not get banned, you can listen to it right now. Well, after we talk, listen to it right now at Why Sex and Video Games Matters. It's actually the introduction to the book. So there's just the prelude. It's about 5, 6, 7 minutes. It'll get you a feel as far as the direction that book is going in. And remember, this book was written in 2007, 2008. And so the references in there and the structures in there are based on that period of time. That's something I was really trying to do with the book. And those of you that are familiar with the book or have read it already understand the vibe with it, where my intention wasn't to have something that just would represent, say, 2025, the year that we have coming up. That was not my intention. I wasn't thinking about the future beyond where things might go. My main thing is almost like a Polaroid, a snapshot of what happened within those 35 years from 1973, when Pong came out and Deep Throat came out, all the way to, when it came out in 2000, the book came out in 2008, that 35-year span. What does it mean what are these representations? Are we going to be able to preserve this history? Unlike other histories, video game history actually isn't preserved as much. And if you do a quick Google search, or if you're familiar with video game history, then you'd understand that video games have been, particularly back in day, again, I got the gray hairs. So I was around when Space Invaders came out and all that stuff. A lot of those arcade games that that I played, my kids are 8 and 11. So a lot of the arcade games that I was playing, particularly when my youngest, when I was my youngest age, when I was 8, like they're in the back of my memory somewhere. I was at a place called Aladdin's Castle, which if you are my generation or older and you're into video games, you know what Aladdin's Castle was. And basically it was this chain of arcade halls. And I used to have my birthdays there. Speaking of birthdays, used to have my birthdays there, literally this day, but in previous years, many, many years ago, before they went out of business. They were like an installation at the mall. And there's, I don't know, a fourth, maybe a half of those video games that don't exist anymore. Like they're just in my mind and maybe in the mind of other, middle-aged folks and older who happen to be arcade gamers at the time. But there's no archive for them. There's no place. There's no history as far as being able to go there. Now we have a wonderful pinball and video game history museum here in Las Vegas. I was lucky enough to go with my kids who were in Cub Scouts, which fantastic experience. But aside from that, we don't have much. I saw the writing on the wall. And so that's why it was really important, again, to do Porn and Pong. And even with it being banned in some countries, I think it might still be banned in some countries. Again, get it while you can. That's why it was really important to do that, because, again, not a whole lot of other people were doing it. And whatever memories we had of those games, a lot of them aren't on home systems. A lot of them are relatively obscure, but they still matter and they're still representative of that time in pop culture. And so the more we do that, the better. Also, a great place to, if you want to learn more about video game history, is just to do YouTube, which shout to YouTube, where the amount of things that they're able to show is amazing. There's a couple of channels I've stumbled across. They're not hard to find, so I'm not even going to name them, but shout out to them. And they're showing, arcade games from 1989 or even from 1983, which is closer to when I was my son's age. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember this. And I thought that was like a fever dream. Porn and Pong, hopefully, is part of that legacy. You can listen to the first chapter right now, Why Sex and Video Games Matter. It's only about 7-8 minutes. You listen to it right now, and this link will actually link you to the playlist. So as the audiobook in its censored form, at least on public consumption on bringeworth.tv, as it rolls out in the upcoming weeks, and I do mean weeks, then you'll be able to you'll be the first to know. And of course, you can subscribe right now to Bringeworth TV to learn more about it. So what banned books have you guys been into? Or are there certain banned books that you're curious about? I would love to hear in the comments. Let me know what's happening with that. If you want to know more about some of my favorite books and more insight from my birthday last year, you can go to 40 Books to Transform Your Life, a live Q&A. I do give 40 books, and and you can't see past my big head. There's a picture of my relatives right there, but behind me are a lot of my books, a lot of my friends' books, and then more books down there. A lot of them are featured in this list of 40, including, of course, Porn and Pong. You are listening and or watching Bringeworth, as I have gastric issues. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I'm here to coach you as a side hustler, solopreneur, otherwise an entrepreneur. Bringeworth TV, almost 400 episodes strong. You can watch it most Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time, or just subscribe for free. And then, turn on notifications to get a notification when I have a new episode rolling out for you. All right. My next favorite banned book, And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz. This bad boy is big. It's a big book. It is thorough. And frankly, it has 8-point type. I'm glad I read this when I was younger. Yeah, I'd have to have the bigger version of it. But you can also see the browning of it and how I circle certain parts of it. This has been, in fact, in Porn and Pong, my own banned book, I end up citing it a lot in the second chapter, which talks about HIV and the AIDS epidemic, and coinciding with a lot of the births that were happening in the video game industry in the very early to mid 80s. And that was also, again, an era when I was around my youngest son's age. I was around 8. And the impact that it had as far as that epidemic, which is still going on, by the way, just to be clear. It's not past tense. But that had a tremendous impact on my sexuality and sexuality of everyone around me. Because as kids, you're looking at it and it's like, oh, I actually could die from being intimate with someone. And if you're around at that time and you're an adult, adults were freaking out. So you can imagine, being an elementary school kid, being a middle school kid, and just starting to get into your feelings, starting to understand your body and stuff. And it's like the wrong decision could kill me. That was a discussion at the time. The discussion matured rapidly when this book came out. I remember. And the discussion point around where HIV and AIDS came from, the politics, quite literally, that prevented people from getting help, and the faces and the journeys behind so many people who lost that fight, who passed away for reasons that could have been prevented or at least delayed. With all the politics around it, with all the egos, they get into the fight between American scientists and French scientists. And you might have seen the movie. I know Alan Alda was in it and some other major actors. You might have seen the movie on HBO that came out in the early 90s. It still can't. It was a fantastic movie. I think it might have been a miniseries. It was a very long movie, but it can't touch this one. Randy was amazing. I think he passed away quite a few years ago, so rest in peace to him. Fantastic book. Controversial book. Shocker. Because number one, it talked about gay lives. Gay, and also I think there are some bisexual men here as well. Gay and bi lives, part of the LGBTQ plus spectrum, as we would call it today. That tagline didn't exist back in the 80s. So that alone, made it a controversial book. I think it might have been banned in some countries. It might still be banned in some countries. The real controversy, though, funny enough, was not the sexuality or the orientation of it. If you could say that about a book, the orientation of the book, but really about the politics behind it. And we had I'm speaking from a very American, US-centric viewpoint right now, but it'll make sense in a second. We had some really shady folks here, and folks that were worried about tenure and how they looked in the public and all that stuff. And that took priority over literally, at that point, thousands of people dying. Maybe hundreds of people dying a week, if not at its peak a day. And it wasn't just US, it was worldwide. Again, if you were there, if you're one of my younger viewers, again, I got the gray hair. So if you're one of my younger viewers and you're in your 30s or younger and you literally weren't around when the HIV or AIDS epidemic was at its peak, as far as people being scared, poopless, try to keep it clean, you should absolutely grab this book. Absolutely. Don't watch the movie. Grab the book. Take your time with it. It is worth the absolute time. If you end up grabbing Porn and Pong, sorry, we got five different books, 3 different mics here. If you end up grabbing Porn and Pong, again, I cited directly a few times in there, including interaction related to politics. We got an election coming up here in America in, 6 weeks as of this recording. If you're watching it live in 6 weeks, number one, please register to vote. Number two, if you want to understand why politics matter, you got to read this book, or at least see the excerpt in my own book, Porn and Pong, and you can actually see why why they matter. They matter so much. And there's some heartbreaking stuff in there that, it's heavy on the heart. It is not an easy book to read, not because of the skill of the writing. The writing is excellent. It's more because of the topic in itself. And it's tough. Speaking of doing some tough listening, if you want to understand more about dealing with the heavier emotional things, and I think that's the reason why some of these books are banned, because we're not equipped for that. Go ahead and check out my earlier live show, the best emotional intelligence books out right now. I think that would help you understand how to deal with uncomfortable emotions, whether it's in regards to what other people do or to our very uncomfortable history, and that's America or elsewhere. Wherever you live in the world, there's some uncomfortable history there. I can guarantee you that. So how to process those things. And a lot of that uncomfortable emotional history comes from us not knowing how to deal with our emotions, right? Whether you're a frustrated artist that didn't get into school, or you're someone that feels inadequate because of their height, their entire wars that are based on that. If you know your history, you know who I'm talking about. Good place to go to from here. Again, we're talking about banned books today. My favorite banned books, sponsored by Short Form, the Ultimate Book Reader. Get a free trial and get 20% off their annual subscription. I don't know how long it's going to last, so I'd take advantage if I were you. And be sure and check out Banned Books Week, which is happening right now as we speak. And I have lists of my favorite banned books. You don't have to write down all those squigglies or letters. One of these days, the URLs will get easier, but we're not at the point yet. We have AI and we're trying to get to Mars, but we still got a million different letters in the URLs. All the URLs are below. You don't have to take notes. Save your hands. I'm entrepreneur coach Damon Brown. I help you as a side hustler, solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. You listen to the Bring Your Worth or watching the Bring Your Worth show, bringyourworth.tv, most Wednesdays, always live. And Wednesdays, 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time, you can subscribe for free. I'm curious, what has been the most uncomfortable book you've ever read? This was up there. I'm not going to lie. And again, it's a thick book. This comes to mind. There's a handful of other ones where, I feel that way about some movies too. Like I think about that with the movie Requiem for a Dream. I think about that with the movie Seven, where I consider them masterpieces. And as soon as it was done, I was like, wow, that is a beautiful movie. I never want to see it again in the rest of my life. Have you ever read a book like that? Let me know in the comments. I'm super curious if you have any thoughts on that, and if there's anything you experience in that regard. All right. Next book, oldie but goodie, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. This is a deep one. The Jungle is a great book, but I have to give some quick history. It's one of those books that actually changed, speaking of politics, the course of politics, and also literally changed our lives today. We wouldn't have the society we have, particularly when it comes to food, if it weren't for Upton Sinclair's fabulous book. The premise is simple. It follows one, or it might be multiple, but I think it highlights one. We call him a food worker today, but they have a different term back then. And I want to say it was at the turn of the last century. So I want to say it was 1910. Takes place in Chicago, a couple other places, but mostly in Chicago. And it's in the meatpacking district. Now, the Chicago meatpacking district, I used to live in Chicago, shout out to Northwestern. The Chicago meatpacking district isn't as well known nowadays, but it might have been the biggest one What's more well known now, though, and maybe even at the time, is the New York meatpacking district. There's also one in LA. I know that. The reason they're called the meatpacking district is because that's where they used to slaughter the cows or the chickens or what have you, mostly cows. I think a lot of it was beef. And his book was an expose on how filthy the beef was being handled. Filthy as in workers were getting cut and none of them are wearing gloves. We're talking people getting hurt and having to get stuff amputated if the thing that they were working with didn't amputate them on their own. We're talking workers who were sick. This was kind of the era, is either right before or right after, right around the era of influenza, which was at that time the equivalent of COVID today. You can imagine the stuff that was happening. I don't think there was an FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. I think it came out of this book, if I'm remembering correctly. This is like 120 years ago. This was the era of my great-grandmother, not that far back. Without this book and the congressional hearings, I believe it was Congress, but the federal hearings that happened because of it, the research that was done to find out if the stuff Upton was saying in the book was true. If it wasn't for this a century plus ago, then we wouldn't have warning labels. There wouldn't be, the different food industries wouldn't have to say what's in the food. Now, there's plenty of progress that we've done since then, and plenty of progress, frankly, that we have to go on. Shout out to the American Dietetic Association and other people that I've worked with who are doing amazing work in that regard. But when it came out, it was banned. People thought it was, or I shouldn't say people, governments thought it was unfair and exaggerating, grotesque. I believe even overseas was banned. But then the truth started coming out. And suddenly, at least in most countries, I think it's still banned in some countries. Suddenly it wasn't banned. And Upton Sinclair was considered a hero. But initially he was viewed as, by some organizations, some leadership as a villain, as if he was trying to shut down the beef industry or what have you. Now, if we go back, say 20, 25 years ago, again, if you're one of my older viewers in my age range or older, you remember controversy with Oprah and the, I want to say that Texas beef organization, what have you. And that happened, again, back when Oprah had a regular show about a quarter of a century ago. And she went to court for defamation and had to fly down to Texas from Chicago, speaking of Chicago. The irony is not lost on me that, she was saying that from Chicago, a century after Upton Sinclair was saying the same thing about Chicago. But we all have a long way to go in that regard. This was the first book, though, that I know that really tackled it. And it was from, frankly, a voice that people were willing to hear it from. I suspect that there were other people, particularly whether it's, we'll call them in the modern day migrant workers, my ancestors who, literally were slaving away at things, who were aware of the conditions, who might have been fighting for the conditions. But Upton Sinclair was the messenger at the time who was able to deliver it. And you got to honor that. One of my favorite banned books, I read it ages ago. I think I was in grad school when I read it. If you want to go deeper into the idea, the aforementioned book, Fast Food Nations, one of my favorite books of all time. Top 25 nonfiction book of all time for me. Like, again, and you see I want to show receipts. The corners, the dog-eared corners, which is my trademark. The dog-eared corners and the brown, like, this stayed by my bedside. I usually read it every other year to this day. This also was very instrumental as far as with my own banned book, Porn and Pong, and better understanding how to tell a good story. It is fantastic. It is scary. It will change your life. And Eric Schlosser, shout out to him, definitely the descendant of Upton Sinclair. I'm pretty sure he mentioned Upton Sinclair a few times in this, but you know, it's like you got to see the lineage. Like LL Cool J has a new album that just came out. I'm a big hip hop guy, and it's interesting to have him come out. He's quite a bit older than me, and so I grew up listening to him. It's interesting to have him come out. I think it's his fifth decade having a song or album on the Billboard charts or the equivalent of the charts. But then you see his likeness in a Snoop. You see his likeness in a Kendrick Lamar. Like, you go generation to generation. Upton Sinclair is that guy, and Eric Schlosser is definitely one of his descendants. I recommend both books. If you want more of the classic narrative and understand how things were a century ago, grab Upton Sinclair's book. If you want to know the world we're living in now, which in some ways better, some ways worse. Not gonna lie. Sometimes you have to know how the sausage is made. It is a great book. It's also a great read. It's non-put-downable, as we used to say back in the day. Shout out to Eric Schlosser. If you want to better understand how people get in these situations or end up in these environments and are having a challenge with their work, which is what we're really talking about. We're talking about food. We're also talking about a way of living. People were working within slaughterhouses, they used to call them. Now they call it meat packing. They're working in those areas. They were doing this work because at that moment, there weren't a whole lot of options for them. If you want to understand your own career better and make strong decisions, check out the live that I did. Great career books, how to make your best career. I give some good book recommendations to help you on your career and figure out what to do next. And again, with the stuff that people are going through in the jungle, and particularly, again, Fast Food Nation was maybe a quarter of a century ago. Might have been late 90s, very early aughts. I want to say late 90s. The stuff I talk about it wasn't that far back. So think about that as you go ahead and decide what you want to do with your life and how you want to take care of yourself. Because once you read those, it'll definitely make you think about your own life too. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I help you as a side hustler, soulpreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. This is Bring Your Worth TV. I come to you Wednesdays live, 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. What is the book that actually changed your behavior? I'm really curious about this. Hop in the comments. Like one where you read it and you're like, I'm never going to do this again. Or you said, oh, you know what? I'm going to change this. I'm going to go in a different direction. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm super, super curious about that. All right, our final book for the day, The 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah Jones. Fantastic book, another thick one. This has to do with the beginnings of African-American culture in America. It won a Pulitzer Prize. A Pulitzer Prize. The only other time I said Pulitzer Prize in the show was when I did the Kendrick Lamar episode. He also won a Pulitzer Prize. And yet, so many leaders were trying to get this book banned. The book is really simple. How does Black history make American history? That's all. It's really simple. Really simple. Black history on capitalism, Black history on punishment, Black history on healthcare. That's an important one. Black history on sugar. I have to read that chapter again. Black history on sugar. Kind of like my man, Mark Kalansky, his fantastic book, Cod. Excuse me, his fantastic book, Cod, as well as his fantastic book, almost said sugar, Salt. I'm a Cod guy myself, but Salt was a bigger book. There's a big history here. Sugar was actually through through the Caribbean, through the slave trade, and what they called, I believe they call it the triangle. And so my ancestors, there's one side of the family right there. You can see my beautiful greats, great grandmother, as well as some of my older greats, as far as great uncles and so forth. That's one side of my family. Another side of the family, which I think it's up there, somewhere up there. Somewhere up there is my Go Cup from New Orleans, because that's where another part of my other side of my family comes from, which is why New Orleans is really close to my heart. Both sides of my family, all sides of my family, they came through that trade in some form or another, and that was driven by sugar. It's really simple. It's emotional, but it's not an emotional statement. It's just true. That's why I have the complexion that I have. This gets into that. I have three wonderful parents, my mom, my dad, and my stepdad, who schooled me, raised me, had me memorizing Langston Hughes and Nikki Giovanni poems when I was 5 or 6 years old. I can still recite some of them to that day. Ego tripping comes to mind. So there was a certain amount of education and pride combined in the households that I was raised in. Hopefully, I'm passing that down to my boys. If I, and then broader, we don't understand those different dynamics and what this true history is, then culturally, we're not going to make it. I don't mean worldwide, I mean America. And what I mean by that is, it's almost like wanting to ban this book, which controversy happened about 2 or 3 years ago when it came out, right before I won the Pulitzer. Who are you going to go with, the politicians or the Pulitzer Committee? But if we're going to try to erase part of the Black part of the American experience, and we're erasing the American experience, period. It's like saying we're going to erase the Italian part of the American experience. It's like, New York wouldn't exist. What are we talking about? See how ridiculous that sounds? And so when we ban material, or try to ban material, then that's what it feels like to me. It feels like we're trying to remove parts of history. But it's like Jenga. History is like Jenga. You start taking out parts, and it's going to topple over at a certain point. It's not going to be the truth anymore. So are we trying to get to the truth, or are we ashamed of what the truth is? My folks were enslaved people. It's just true. I don't need to be on, the PBS show with Henry Louis Gates. Shout out to him to find that out. I know that. I know that from my own history and from talking to my families. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk about it, and it doesn't make me less. And if people were on another part of that equation, that should be discussed too. I've been reading a lot of The Body Keeps Score. Body Keeps the Score. People always say Body Keeps Score, but it's actually The Body Keeps the Score. I've been reading it. I've been actually reading it as I'm putting my kids to bed. They've actually heard a couple passages of it, but it's a pretty tough book to read. So I've been keeping that part private. A lot of talk about trauma. Now it stays in the body. And I think about that as I reflect on my life, again, with it being my birthday today. So it's making me ultra reflective, and hitting the certain age and the energy of it being like, what trauma or what energy from my ancestors who did not have space to meditate. I have a meditation mat right over there, right by the window. So who cannot sit there and meditate, who didn't have the Trisha Hersey's, who does the Nat Mystery, or Brene Brown, of course, who does emotional intelligence, who didn't have these wise, amazing women and men talking about their emotions and helping us unlock these things, instead of just staying inside of them. I feel like when society tries to ban a book like this, it's making the trauma stay inside. And with the slave trade, that part was international. But with the slave trade, with the challenges of us connecting to each other, with the brutal and sometimes ugly decisions that we've made as a whole, everybody, whether you're on the receiving end, or you pass it on, or you're just scared and made a decision that was not humane, it feels like we're at the point we deserve to know the truth as far as how we've contributed to things today. Because things that aren't named, they can't be dealt with. Once you give it a name, once you give it a structure, once you give it a book, that's when the energy changes. Shout out to Nicole. I love your work. The link right here is special. Made me so excited. I was planning on mentioning this book anyway, talking about books that people are trying to ban. Either books like mine that have been banned, or books that people are trying to ban, like the 1619 Project. And to come to find out, they have a new edition coming out. The link right there. 1619 Project Visual Edition. I looked at it online. I got this as a gift. Love you, Ma. I got this as a gift a while ago. I might have to just pony up and get another copy of the visual edition. It looks gorgeous. It looks like one of those coffee table books. Actually, I need to get a coffee table, so that might be on there. That, as well as Black Food, which is over here. One of my favorite books. I have a short essay in there. Yeah, shout out to my man Bryant Terry. That'll also be on my coffee table. But if you want to get the new visual version of it, you can pre-order it right now. I want to say it comes out right before Halloween, like October 22nd or something. Be sure and check it out. I know it's going to sell out. And price-wise, it wasn't too shabby. It's not going to be as cheap as a paperback, but for the visuals for a coffee table book, I would get my hands on it as soon as possible. I'm going to go ahead and pre-order mine over the next week or two as soon as possible, because I got other stuff going on. But when I get a copy, I'll be sure and bring it on to the show. Again, I think it's out like October 22nd. There's some good books coming out. Oh, I can't wait till some upcoming lives. Oh, I got some good stuff coming for you guys. Yeah, fall of 2024 is looking nice. All right. Speaking of the heaviness and the trauma and so forth, if you're having a tough time, I suggested a handful of books. I did this, I want to say a few months ago. And it was one of my favorite live episodes that I've done recently. Absolutely. Because it talks about, when you're talking about change and transition, it's one thing to be going through a change in your life, career, or what have you. It's another thing to have the transition as far as the emotional transformation that often needs to happen for us to accept a change. This talks about that. Now I have the episode from a couple weeks ago. It talks directly about change and transition. You'll see the link below. We're just going to bring you work.tv. It'll be on the front page. But this one is also a really good starter kit, and specifically talks about the books that are going to help you through those changes. It's been wonderful. I'm so excited to spending my special day with y'all. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown, helping you as a side hustler, solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV live on Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You subscribe for free, and you can get under my Heap and Stack of book. Man, I give you guys some thick books today. It's like 10 pounds. The complete Bring Your Worth collection is available now everywhere, audiobook and so forth. If you want to listen to the audiobook right now, you actually click the link below and listen to it for free on YouTube. And in case you missed it, I had a great episode a couple weeks ago about 5 secrets to mastering change and transition. Talk about your favorite, or sorry, actually my favorite, hopefully your future favorite banned books. You can get the listings and learn about Banned Books Week, which is happening right now. Support your banned books. Everybody wants us to have the information. Support the ones that do share it. And this is supported, consequently, by Short Form, your ultimate book companion. Until next time, where we can always bring your worth, you can always build for now. Thanks for joining.